Welcome back. In this video, we'll be covering Learning Objective 11.2, describe the personal qualities that influence whether a given individual will help, for PSY 235 Social Psychology. The question we're really looking at in this section of the chapter is, are there individual differences in prosocial behavior? And before we get any farther into this, of course there are. Some people simply help more than other people. Some people are more interested in being prosocial than other people. Some people are downright narcissistic and don't like anyone. So yes, there are individual differences. That said, is there something that we could label, some label we could construct to describe the uber helpful person? And that's what some researchers refer to as the altruistic personality. The assumption here is that some individuals have qualities, personality traits, and characteristics that cause them to help others in a lot of different situations. So regardless of the differences in these types of situations, they're just really helpful people. Now, psychologists have developed measures, and usually these measures are empathy-oriented. So one example that you're given in your text is something called the Empathic Concern Questionnaire. And the assumption is, and really they may want to change the name to the empathy personality or the empathic personality, but the label is what the label is. The argument is that some people are highly empathy driven. They feel a lot of what other people feel. Not like they have some sort of mystical powers, but they are very emotionally attuned to the feelings of others, and they feel it hard. And that then translates, the argument goes, into actually acting on those concerns. So when we look at the data, though, so that's the theory, is that if you're high in these empathic traits, that you should be more likely to be helpful regardless of circumstances. But the data doesn't really support that in full. Yes, there are some individuals who hit real high on the Empathic Concern Questionnaire, but if you vary the situation and you kind of make it, a complex social situation, highly empathetic people are no more likely than low empathy people to provide assistance in high density situations. Like if you're surrounded by a whole bunch of people and you have high empathy on questionnaires like this, if there's a lot of cognitive competition for your attention, you're not any more likely to be helpful. So personality doesn't help us very much, generally speaking. Other individual variables are things like gender and culture. So first, let's look at gender differences or sex differences. In Western culture, depending on how gender roles are defined and sex roles are defined, masculinity in Western cultures like the United States, Northern and Western Europe, Canada, just as examples, the masculine gender role tends to be defined in terms of heroism, of being tough and strong and big and swooping in to save the day. The feminine gender role is expected to be helpful in a different way by providing nurturance and care and support. What you see there is the masculine norm for helping behavior is emergency based and very physical, whereas the feminine norm for helping is long-term nurturance and care. And these patterns, when we look across cultures within the broader Western culture, we tend to see that pattern hold pretty steady. Even in some non-Western cultures, it's been found that some of these masculine norms about chivalrous, heroic, emergency helping, and the feminine norms of nurturance and care tend to hold sway. Now, it's not in every culture that is the case, and you can probably come up with loads of examples from popular culture where we have all kinds of female superheroes who are just boss strong and do all kinds of heroic things. But at the cultural level, so not talking about superhero movies, but real life, the gender norms that we have still tend to push different expectations about helping, with the feminine expectation being long-term close relationships that are built on nurturance and care, whereas the masculine expectation is fly in, save the day, and then leave again, right? Now, there are cultural differences in addition to gender and sex role differences. There are broader cultural differences in prosocial behavior. Some of them are superseded by just global norms. So regardless of culture, doesn't matter which culture, in-groups tend to be favored over out-groups. But we do see some differences cross-culturally in how strong this effect is. In some cultures, people are expected to really go out of their way to help out-group members. And, from a Western cultural perspective, that sounds a little odd, right? In some non-Western cultures, though, there is a deeply held cultural expectation that you help others who are not like you. And, in Western culture, that is just simply not the norm. People often help both in-group and out-group members, but it can be for different reasons, depending on your cultural context. We are just, because we know them better, because we feel more similar to them, we tend to feel more direct empathy toward people in our in-groups. So, and remember what an in-group is. That's the group that you identify with and you see yourself as a member of. You learned this in the last chapter. We become attracted to people and become friends with them, engage in various kinds of relationships with them when we feel similar to them and connected to them. That tends to create a context for higher levels of empathy. Outgroups are groups that we don't identify with. Now, we don't necessarily have animosity toward those groups, but we may not have liking for them either. So we tend to help outgroup members when there's payoff. So with in-group members, it can tend to be more empathy driven and based on social responsibility norms. With out-group members, we tend to be more helpful if we're going to get a reward for it, if there's an obvious payoff. Now, digging into these cultural differences in a little bit different way, your authors give you the example of, and forgive my pronunciation, I have no Spanish language training, simpatia is a norm-driven set. It's a value. It's a cultural value, and there are norms associated with it. It's more common in Spanish-speaking countries, and the assumption is that you have a collection, that people are expected to have a collection of traits, like being friendly, being good-natured, pleasant, polite, and helpful. So good people in some of these countries are expected to have that cluster of traits. So being nice, being kind, being polite, being pleasant, and helpful to strangers, as well as your kin. In some research, what they've found, they went to large cities in a variety of different countries and just watched what people did. And what they found was that in some of these Spanish-speaking countries, and there's a big chart in your textbook that I'm not going to repeat here, but in the countries that had high values related to simpatia, they gave much more help to strangers, pleasant, good-natured, helpful behavior to strangers than in countries that did not have that kind of values expectation. So there are entire cultures that are not built around the idea that being a good person means being friendly, polite, good-natured, and pleasant. Some cultures value a whole different mosaic of traits. So think about that. When that is a valued personality profile, helping goes up to 83%. Whereas in countries where that is not the valued personality profile, helping drops significantly. Another individual difference variable that you might think would be directly related to prosocial behavior is religion. And this is complicated research. Most religious traditions, or faith traditions, if you will, teach some kind of ethic of being good to others and wanting to be treated as you would wanting to treat others as you would expect to be treated yourself. So, the golden rule tends to show up in virtually every religious tradition in one way or another. The research question could be, do religious people engage in more prosocial behavior? And you could make a hypothesis that highly religious people should be expected to engage in more prosocial behavior, particularly if their faith tradition drives them in that direction. Religious people are more likely to be prosocial if the person they're being prosocial toward shares their own point of view. So you're talking in-group, out-group effects again. So for people who score high in religiosity, for example, and that doesn't mean just being a member of a church, but being a person who actively lives their faith. So people who score high in religiosity do tend to help be more likely to be prosocial, but they're significantly more likely to do that for other people who share their faith tradition. Other faith traditions would be considered outgroups. So when it comes to helping strangers, if you take in-groups out of the equation and you're just helping someone you do not know, being high in religiosity is not useful as a predictor. So people who are strong in their religious orientation and they're highly engaged with their faith are no more helpful to strangers than people who identify as not high in religiosity. And that's often surprising to people. There's some evidence, and this is tricky research. So I want you to pause, take a deep breath. This is tricky research. Some types of religiosity, some types of religious beliefs can actually drive wedges between in-groups and out-groups, and that can actually increase hostility between those groups. So you're not asking, is religiosity associated with helpful behavior? Is it actually possibly associated with aggressive behavior? There is some evidence that supports that, but it's usually in cultural contexts where there's a long history of conflict between groups that are defined based on their faith traditions. So it's a much more complex picture than just saying, people who are highly religious are just mean. That's not what that's about at all. It's more about in-group, out-group effects and long-term experiences of conflict. Religion, as a result, can, as an identity factor, become a way of identifying your in-group. Who are my people? If you are a highly religious person, you're scoring high in religiosity, and your faith is very important to you, you may identify as your in-group other people who have similar beliefs. And you're more likely to help people who are in your in-group, regardless of whether it's defined by religion or not. So that's why your authors say that religion is likely another example of in-group favoritism. Now, taking us in a completely different direction, there's been a fair amount of research over the decades looking at how does mood impact helping. And, at first you might think, why would your mood matter? It matters a lot. When you're in a happy mood, you may in fact be more helpful than when you're in other kinds of moods. But also sometimes when you're sad, you may decide, what would make me happy right now is to do something nice for someone else. So we need to look at the affective mood. So first, positive moods. What's been found in laboratory studies and in field studies is if you can put people in a good mood, just make them laugh, play them happy music, tell them jokes, they tend to be more helpful in a whole slew of ways. Good moods tend to, and why is this? When we're in a good mood, when we've been laughing, when we've been smiling, we tend to be more positive and optimistic in our orientation. And those are feelings. Optimism tends to be associated with prosocial behavior. Also, if we can do something nice for other people, it can sustain good moods. So if you get people happy and then they help, they get even happier and they stay happy longer as a result, especially if they tell the story over and over. So, and then finally, good moods, when you're in a really happy mood, it increases what psychologists call self-attention. So when you feel really good, you spend a lot of your mental energy, and you may not have noticed that you do this, but you do it. When you're laughing and happy, your brain will be going, wow, this feels really good. And, it's very rewarding to feel those good moods. So we like to repeat it. We like to have it happen over and over again. So basically, the idea is if you feel good, you're going to do good. Now, how has this been demonstrated empirically? So the independent variable in these types of studies is mood. And you're going to manipulate mood. One of the early studies involved something most of you have never interacted with. It's called a payphone. We didn't used to have cell phones. We used to have landlines. And when you were out in the wild and you needed to make a phone call, you had to find a thing called a payphone and you had to put money in it. When I was a kid, it was a dime. And then by the time I was a teenager, it was a quarter. So you always had, like if we went to the mall, we had to have money with us so we could call our parents when it was time to go home and tell them to come get us, right? So what did these researchers do? They went out to a mall and they had the payphone there, and people were always using the payphones because you had to call people and you didn't have a phone. So what they did was they would plant a coin in the coin return. And, if you're having trouble imagining this, Google payphone. And if people found a coin, that tends to make them happy. It's like finding $5 in a pair of shorts and it's finally summer and you're putting on your shorts and you're like, $5. It puts you in a happy mood, like you've just gotten a bonus award. And then, half the participants who approached the payphone are going to find a coin and they're going to feel good. Half of them, no coin. So they become the de facto control group. The dependent variable is a person will walk along and they'll drop a bunch of stuff, like a pile of papers, and then they want to find out who's more likely to help, the coin finders or the not coin finders. And what they found was that a very, very, very large percentage of the people who found the coins that the researcher left in the payphone helped the person who dropped their papers pick up the papers. And only a very tiny percent, 4%, of those who didn't find a coin helped the other person. So when you put people in a good mood, and it really doesn't matter how you do it, if you tell them a funny joke, if you show them something joyful, like you show them a cute cat video and you make them laugh, they tend to be more helpful afterwards. Now at the same time, and there's Grumpy Kitty, and isn't it sad that Grumpy Kitty passed away? Anyway, there's also, if you can put people in a bad mood, if you can make them feel angry or sad, they may, in fact, do good things. And this is referred to as the negative state relief model. So if people are feeling down and you give them an opportunity to do something nice, they may engage in prosocial behavior so that they feel less sad. So if they feel happier after having done so. And so it takes away their own distress. another way that this works is more about the distress of the victim. So if you are seeing something like this is what all the sad, starving animal ads on TV try to do. They try to put you in a sad state, and then they give you an out. So they show you all of these emaciated, sad, desperate animals in the TV ads, and it makes you sad and it makes you angry that the animals are like this, that no one is taking care of them. And then you're given an opportunity to make a donation. The reason why the researchers put these horrific images of these animals in front of you is to put you in a negative state. And then they give you the option of giving them money so that you will feel better about the situation because now you have helped. Another thing that can induce a negative state is making people feel guilty. So if you can induce guilt, that increases people's willingness to be helpful. One of the studies that your authors described is about churchgoers, and in particular, they're talking about church contexts where people can attend confession. And what can happen, what some of the researchers have found was that people are more likely to donate to charity directly after they've been to confession. So basically what's happening there is by going to confession and telling a priest that you've done these wrong things, they're going to give you your penance that you have to do if you're Catholic, but then you're still feeling a little guilty. That's kind of the point of admitting your guilt and then going forward. Now, if researchers put a situation in front of you where you can donate to charity, you're more likely when you've done confession to drop money into a charity box immediately after confession. If you've not gone to confession but you've gone in the same church, you're less likely to donate. One of the reasons why this can play itself out is some people, not all people, some people believe that if they've done things that they should feel guilty about, so they've done something wrong, that they can cancel it out by doing some good things in the end. And, if you're a person who shares that kind of belief, that may be something that is in play for you. It's certainly something that researchers have manipulated in the laboratory. So if they put people in a situation where they can cheat, and they do it, they actually cheat, and then they give them an opportunity to do something nice for someone else, the ones who actually cheated do more nice things afterwards. The theory is because they feel guilty. And that concludes my coverage of Learning Objective 11.2. In the next video, we'll be covering Learning Objective 11.3, describe situations in which people are more likely or less to help others.